Hi everyone. So thanks for your patience. We're here with an online meetup for React Native in Sydney. I'd like to welcome very patient Devin Abbott. He stayed up late in San Francisco and has agreed to give us a demo of Deco, an IDE for React. So without further ado, I'll hand over to him. If you'd like to ask questions, please do so on the group chat. Over to you, Devin.
Thanks, John. Hey everyone, my name is Devin Abbott. I'm working on an IDE for React Native called Deco. And so today I'll tell you a little bit about why I started building an IDE and what I want to accomplish. And then I'll show you a couple demos using the IDE. And lastly, since someone asked about it on the Meetup site, I'll show you a Atom plugin that's sort of a work in progress, but that you might find interesting. So let me switch over to screen sharing here. And that seems to be working. So let me know if the audio or video or whatever goes down. Building a React Native IDE. So an IDE enables developers to build higher quality apps faster. And that's really something that excited me when I started doing this. Prior to starting Deco, I worked at Yahoo, and one of the things that drove me crazy was how slow it was to really ship a mobile app for both iOS and Android. And part of that, I think, is how most of the apps really had to be started from scratch. And so when React Native came out, I was super excited about the idea of React components really enabling cross-platform code reuse. And so I want to take all of those moments when, you are struggling to rebuild the same thing on iOS and Android and get rid of them entirely. And even within the React workflow, I want to make that better. So anytime that you have to set up boilerplate or, go through and add your Redux reducers and actions and get the whole single directional data flow set up, those things can all sort of slow you down. And so I want to take all those times where you feel like you're just sort of going in circles and speed them up so that you can develop things really, really fast. And so there are a couple ways I want to do that using developer tools. So some of the big ideas. First, components. For React and React Native, an IDE should be component first. It should be super easy to find, insert, tweak, and publish components. I like the idea of scaffolding a lot, this idea that it's actually easier to start with a lot of extra code and remove things you don't need rather than building from scratch. And then lastly, previewing needs to be instant and responsive, and I need to be able to tweak my app as it's running. So, okay, components. There are a lot of common UX patterns that we see over and over, such as, a grid, and that might contain a video in each cell. But somehow when I try to code this, I often end up writing it from scratch. Or, for example, a sidebar that has a contacts list. Again, this is just a common UX pattern, but when I code it, I'm often piecing it together from scratch. And so wouldn't it be great if I could sort of take this off-the-shelf contacts list, and I'll need to be able to zoom in on it, and I'll need to be able to tweak it, and say, okay, I actually want the colors to be different and the sizes to be different, but largely I use this component out of the box, and I didn't have to write the code myself, and then I can pop it into a sidebar, and I can even then publish it by identifying the most important aspects of the component, and that will enable it to be searchable by anyone else after I've tweaked it and made my own changes to it. And so then I can have a number of different contacts lists as sort of starting points. And okay, maybe they won't all be, perfectly like the design I'm aiming for, but they can get me a very long way. And so when it comes to using components, a lot of the time I feel kind of like this, like I have to rip it open, copy and paste into my code, and it doesn't just work nicely. We really want to change that. We want to make it so components just work. Second thing I want to do is I want to make it so most of your app can be scaffolded. And for this, I'll give a little example of like a hypothetical app I'm trying to build for, say, iOS, which is a messaging app that lets me share pixel art. So I want to be able to share these cool pixel things, and I want friends to be able to share pixel things back, and it's going to be great. It's going to kill WhatsApp. So timeline might look like this. On week 0, I start blank. I start with nothing. And then at the end of week 1, I'd have sort of the basic class hierarchy of the app, maybe some of the data subbed out. At the end of week 2, I'd have all of the sort of smaller details and classes filled out with components. At the end of week 3, it would be polished. It would look like a designer had touched it instead of my ugly default CSS colors. And then at the end of week 4, I would have finally been able to build the cool pixel art sharing feature that I had been focusing on with this app. It's the whole reason for the app's existence. And so, okay, 4-week timeline, pretty average as far as developing an app like this would go, I'd say. But I see a couple things wrong with it. The first thing wrong with it is it took a month. And a month is just too long for this sort of simple task of building a messaging app, which is just full of common UX patterns. I'm not inventing much new here. The second thing that's wrong with it is I spent 75% of my time the first 3 weeks just building these common patterns, and only a quarter of my time building the cool custom feature, which is the pixel art thing. So it's really important that we speed up the development time, and that's important because we need to get in front of users. They often don't use our apps the way they're intended to be used, and they use them in a completely different way, which may be equally good or even better, but we just need to learn that as soon as possible. So okay, let me rewind here back to the beginning. And what if there were a way, instead of starting from scratch, where by the end of the first day I could have a scaffolded version where, okay, maybe the designs don't match my designs, but for all intents and purposes, it's a regular messaging app. And I didn't want to reinvent the wheel there, so I don't really need anything that custom. That would free me up to spend the rest of my time working on the cool pixel art feature. So I could spend almost 100% of my time on what really matters to me, and the sort of underlying infrastructure would just be taken care of automatically. And then the last thing is this concept of everything being live, previewable, and tweakable, and that's a good segue into my demo. So let me pull up the demo version of Deco here. If you get access later, it's a little different, but largely the same concept. And I'll show a cool floaty plane demo, which is kind of like Flappy Bird. But first, let me show how I can snap together the Uber app using components. And I'm just going to put together the main UI of the Uber app. And so, okay, so I have some boilerplate here, and I'm going to insert a component. But instead of writing it myself, I'm going to use Deco, the IDE. And so you'll see here on the left, I have all of the files in my project. In the center, I have the text editor. And on the right, I have the property panel where I can live tweak components as I add them.
I think you share your screen.
Oh, my screen capture ended?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Let me try that again.
There you go.
So I'm in the Deco IDE. It says Electron up here. That's because it's built on Electron. Don't worry about that. Anyway, basic layout is over here on the left. We have the files in my project. In the center, the text editor. And on the right, we have the property panel where I can live tweak things as I work. And over on the far right, we have the iOS simulator. I could also be running the Android emulator. It works with both. So I'll just show you how I can quickly snap together the Uber UI. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a Deco feature to insert a component. And I'm going to hit Command-I and search for a map. And I happen to know I want this full screen one. So I hit Enter, and it pops into my code, which is cool because now I have this immediately working map that I can play with. I'll add another thing. I'll add the location pin, which will appear in the center of the map. And you'll notice a couple things happen when I add these. They are required. In this demo, that's the old syntax, but of course we now use the new import syntax. They are included in the project's files, and the properties are included on the right. When the properties are here, I can actually tweak them, and they live update in real time. So I can tweak this location pin, add text, set the color. Let me add a view to wrap some stuff, and I will add now a title bar and a location search box. And lastly, I'll add a toggle button at the bottom of the simulator. And these components are coming from the Deco component registry, which right now is pretty basic. It's just a GitHub registry, kind of like homebrew recipes, where it tells Deco where to look up the components, dependencies, and what to actually insert when we sort of scaffold the props in your JSX. So okay, so now I've added these components, and it looks roughly like a ride-sharing app. Let me tweak it a little more to make it look like the Uber app. And I'm going to tweak most of the styles actually in the property panel on the right, which makes it super easy to adjust things like colors and layout. So let me change this button color, add a border width, border radius, and some padding. Okay, it's looking a bit more like the Uber app. I still need to do a couple things in terms of functionality. Let me just tweak this button to make it cheaper. And I'm going to connect the map here to the search box. So when I move the map, I'm going to update the text in the search box. And I'll do that just by putting the latitude and longitude of the map into state and pulling that out as the input to the search box. So now if I reload, I can move the map around, and the search box is updated automatically. So you'll notice a couple things when I was creating this. First, I typed very little code myself. Most of it I really was just inserting components. I did have to know which components would be the right ones to use, but generally I think that's a lot easier than having to know how to npm install something, how to write the code to get it set up, and knowing all the documentation. I didn't have to look up a lot of documentation because most of the components just sort of work out of the box, and I can tweak things directly in the code. Of course, if I did want to look up docs, I'd have to do that for like parameters that aren't listed here, but I can get a long way without writing anything. So that was my first demo, this Uber screen. And then the second thing I'll show you guys is a fun little game called Floaty Plane. This is written by a friend, Nick, from the startup Exponent, also doing React Native stuff. And I'll just show you a quick run through of what the game looks like. This is a React Native based Flappy Bird clone. It's pretty difficult. Okay, so I have this game, and if you've ever made a game, you'll know it's really, really difficult to get the gameplay to feel just right. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to live tweak some of the properties of the game in real time so I can make it better or just play with it, really. So I'm going to turn on leap mode, which will make it so my plane can fly through walls, which helps. And then I'm going to start adjusting things. So for example, I'm going to adjust the top of the pipes, and I'm going to increase the gap between the pipes. Let me just type in a big number, like 100. So now you should notice the pipes have gotten further apart. Or I can do things like adjust the amplitude of the plane, so now it flies much higher and lower. Or I can adjust the frequency, so now it flies really, really fast. Or I can set the game, oh, looks like I died. Let me set the amplitude back down to something more sensible. And start again. Nope, this still doesn't work. Clearly, Nick went into, or put a lot more thought into setting up the original parameters than I am now. Or I can say double the speed to 20 times, or I can slow it down all the way to a stop, or back to 10. Or let's see, what else can I tweak? I can adjust the width of the pipes, make them thicker or thinner. I can adjust the properties of the bird. Maybe I scale it up. Maybe I stop the rotation. Or I show the hitbox so I can see where it's hitting things. And of course, this is a much, much worse game than the original. But the point is, a lot of times we have very little visibility into how our changes in code are actually affecting our running app. And so Deco is really useful for tweaking things like this, where you can get that immediate feedback. So that was the last thing I'll show you here. Then I'll end with just a brief teaser for a Atom plugin I'm working on that'll do a lot of the same stuff. So you could imagine being able to tweak properties directly in Atom if you don't want to switch your whole IDE. And of course, that is asking a lot. So we're bringing over a lot of the functionality into Atom and hopefully other editors because we think it's really, really cool. So, let's see. Back to the Hangout. Let me stop sharing my screen here. That was pretty much it for the overview of Deco. It's a great IDE for quickly inserting, tweaking, and publishing components. It makes it really fast to get an app off the ground from 0 to 80%. And we're also trying to open source it and bring in a lot of our cool stuff into Atom and other text editors. Back to you, John.
Great. Well, that was fantastic. So I'm just looking at some questions here. So what I have is, can you talk about, so how does the component describe what parameters can be changed with sliders and things? How is that done?
Sure, it's definitely not the obvious way. The obvious way would be something like introspecting prop types and flow types. We actually do something a little different. So again, the demo version is slightly different than the latest. Here, let me just open the latest in case you guys try it later. Let me screen share once again. Looks like we lost John, but that's okay. So this is just a slightly newer version of Deco. I don't have my demo set up for it, but the way it works to make things tweakable is I can actually hold Command, and then things sort of get this underline. If things are underlined and I Command-click them, they get added into the right side. And that's how I can start tweaking them. And you'll notice as I tweak this, it starts changing the code as well. And so when I insert a component, like let's say I want this activity indicator, it has basically a template or a snippet. And the snippet already knows which things should be editable and how, because the author of the snippet specified them. So the author specified how to edit each property and each style, whether that's line items, justify content, size, color, etc. And where these are actually coming from, again, it is quite primitive, but let me pull it up. There is a GitHub repository called Deco Components, and in the package.json, like this activity indicator, points to where it should be getting its snippet from. So it knows to pull its snippet from this URL. And so that's sort of how the whole system fits together. Hopefully that answered the question.
Very good. Okay, so I think you hinted at another question is how are you going to support third-party components?
Right now we're thinking, let's start simple. We can always sort of build something more advanced. You can pull request our GitHub repository. Anything added there will automatically appear in any Deco IDE. So it's all being pulled from this one central source. In the future, we could imagine expanding it into like being NPM based, and so any package.json and npm that says it has Deco components will pop into the IDE as well.
Okay, great. So I'm just reading off the questions there that you can probably see. So there's another question there about code auto-completion and refactoring. What there?
We don't have much auto-completion or refactoring yet. We're really focusing on the components and the real-time editing. Of course, that stuff is super important, and we're actually figuring out if there's like a way that it makes more sense for us to merge in with Atom and Nuclide or something, because they're doing a really great job on auto-completion. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to duplicate the effort there.
Yeah, that's right. There's an equally good effort going on at Microsoft with their Visual Studio Code IDE as well.
Yes, definitely. They're doing some really cool stuff too.
There's a question here about, so any plans for adding a visual editor for drag and drop features? That's, yeah, could you talk about that?
That's actually, it's interesting. That's what we started with. We started as this visual editor for really designers and engineers to collaborate. And then we ended up sort of realizing that in order to build a really, really, really good visual editor, you need to have a solid foundation in like a really good editor for engineers. And if you can't at some point edit the lowest level of code that you need to, it's just no good. So that's why we focused in making the code editing and sort of live tweaking really good there. And it's actually pretty easy for us to layer the visual tools back on top. So I don't have any timeline or anything, but we hope to get back to that.
Okay. Great. Another question here about editing the existing app. So I imagine the answer to that's yes, because you've got to test it, right? So.
Yes, you can edit an existing app. It would be pretty terrible if you couldn't. That will also add that the creation flow is kind of cool. Let me just share again. One of the things that is a little bit annoying about React Native right now is I have to go to the command line, do React Native init, and wait a minute or two for it to download. In Deco, you can just hit File New, and it sets up a blank React Native project for you. Mm-hmm. Well, it normally does, but I seem to have encountered a bug, so I just won't worry about that. But it normally has an instant creation of apps too, which is cool. And yes, of course, you can edit an existing app.
And what about keeping up to date with new versions of React? How does that work?
We don't do a very good job of it right now. But basically, nothing about what we do is really specific to a specific version of React, or even React at all in a sense. Like our components are React-based, but in theory, if you made snippets or whatever for another framework, it would work just fine. So you can use any version of React, or you can even use React on the web if you'd like. But if you want the like really quick new project creation flow, for that you'd use our version of React. And right now I think we ship with 25.
Okay, so updating the version of React in Deco means updating the Deco app itself, does it?
Yeah.
Okay, yep, that makes sense.
It's not ideal maybe, but it works for now.
All right. And probably the most important question from the audience is, when will they get beta access? Well, let's ask that nicely. Can they please get beta access?
Yes, of course. Either email me, or you can just sign up, and I'll use the sign up time being within a couple minutes from now to know that you're from here. But let me just give you my email in the chat. Just send me an email, and I'll give you access to the email you sent me from.
All right. So I don't think people on YouTube can see that, but I'll post that email address in the meetup as well.
Sounds good.
All right. So you're still in private beta right now. I'm not gonna ask about timeframes, but I did want to ask, so what's the general plan for the rest of this year? I would imagine a public release is a important milestone, but what are you hoping to do this year?
Basically, our progress isn't as fast as we'd like right now, and so sort of to respond to that and to get other people involved also, we're going to make Deco open source. We're going to do that probably next 2 weeks roughly, and let in all of the remaining people who have signed up, and then it'll just be public. And I think one of the things that you'll notice if you try it is there's definitely a lot to be desired. So like in a lot of ways, it's not as good as Atom. But we do think the component flow and the live tweaking are really, really cool. So we hope people check it out for that at least, and maybe it'll turn into something much bigger. We'll still, of course, be working on it. Or maybe it'll just be this interesting concept that we end up merging all the good ideas into Atom and Nuclide. We were at Facebook today, and we were talking with some of the guys who work on Nuclide, and they were like, oh, that's a good idea. We're going to steal that. So it's entirely possible by, next month it'll all be a Nuclide anyway, and we're certainly going to try to help them with that if they desire it and add plugins where it fits.
Oh, very good. Okay, so have you actually announced that your intentions to take it open source?
Nope, not yet. We haven't made any sort of public announcement other than this.
Well, that's great. We got the exclusive then.
Got the exclusive sneak peek.
Well, that's probably it. Let me just check the rest of the questions, and then we can probably wrap up.
Let's see. The IDE itself is written in React and Redux, which is kind of cool. It's packaged in Electron. We actually sometimes use the IDE to write the IDE when we're like tweaking styles and stuff. It's mind-blowingly cool.
It's very recursively meta. Very.
That looks like most of the questions.
Good stuff. All right. Well, look, again, I appreciate your patience, and I know it's late there, so thank you very much for your time, Devin. I'm sure we got a lot out of that. I'm personally very excited about Deco and however it sees the light of day. I'm sure it has a great future. Yeah, thank you. It's a great effort.
All right. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Good. Thanks, everyone, for attending, and we'll put the video up on YouTube. Thanks again. Okay. Bye.